No, that is fascinating. This is exactly why I want to talk to you about this,
Thank
because,
you.
exactly like you said,
Yeah.
it's not fair and it's not right, and it's so minimalistic that it makes people like me wonder, at almost 50 years old, thinking, well, what is Jewish horror? So that should, and I think the thing that I really enjoy too about the Law and Shalom is that throughout all of it, I mean, the Jewish history and the Jewish culture within those characters that you depict in there, it's not. I mean, I don't want to use because it sounds very harsh to say it doesn't feel like it's shoved down our throats. Although I think there are certain things that really do need to be shoved down our throats because clearly we're not getting it. At the same time, it's so natural that it just happens to be about Jewish characters, where nobody in the story is necessarily waving, a flag and saying, hey, I'm Jewish, look at me, pay attention to me. It's just, it comes across so naturally, and it gives us a chance to feel like we really are part of these stories and we're part of the everyday living and the everyday trials and tribulations, and that I think we can all relate to, where we have a belief system that we're constantly questioning. Well, it's the same thing in these stories. It just happens to be about their constant question, their faith and their Jewish culture and what it really means to them. And I think it's such a beautiful backdrop in your storytelling.
Yeah, and I also want to, also touch on that. There is also a tendency when you have Jewish characters. You have the Woody Allen types who are the very, I consider Woody Allen a very narcissistic filmmaker in a sense.
Oh yeah.
I'm not saying much good about Woody Allen, believe me.
Sure.
This is kind of he kind of cemented the vision of the Jewish character in mainstream culture as the neurotic, the nebbish, and I consider that a very kind of narcissistic lens to view it through, when his characters are also always ending up with success. They end up with all the women. They're kind of like loved for their for these flaws in a sense, when it's the opposite of vulnerability. It's presenting this kind of like very full, it's cemented this view of Jewish characters as not only victims but like neurotic and anxious and and even at also times greedy and grasping. One thing I wanted to do with my works was give a new view to Jewish characters. Like, how can they be? Like, I think, from the Long Shalom, you have Alan Aldenberg, and Alan is very much in the realm of the Philip Marlowe and the the Sam Spade. He's the hard-boiled private detective, and he's very flawed. He's not what I would describe as a spotless person at all. He has a history.
No way.
Has a history with the mob. He's
yeah.
He's got bills to pay, and I was trying to do that in a sense. I wasn't touching on the stereotype of, just the greedy Jew. But he is someone with a darker backstory. Anti-Semitism has definitely informed his life. He is someone who has been through, violence and war, and he's worked for the mob. And yeah, there were Jewish, there was the Jewish mob at the time. There was, Arnold Rothstein was a very real historical figure, and he was a major player in the rising prominence of organized crime.
Huge.
But Alan is also, he's brave, he's resourceful, he's clever. He doesn't adhere to a lot of these traditional stereotypes. He's not even devoutly Jewish at first, but he's still Jewish. It still informs him. It's still a huge part of his worldview. And I think I want to portray characters who are all across the spectrum, Jews who are not perfect, and Jews who are who are ruthless and dangerous, and people who are kind of, badass in a sense. Like take one of characters like Rutger Hauer from Flesh and Blood, to give an idea of, not totally like that. That's probably more villainous than I would want to go with the lead character, to be honest. But characters like that, and what if they were Jewish? People who have been kind of trod on by the world, and keep going and keep swinging. Like Hunger is as old as this land. My main characters, Esther and Siobhan. Siobhan is a Jewish convert. Esther is half Jewish, half Creek in the American Old West, which is a very hard time. How does it inform them? How does it affect their lives? How does it how do they keep going? And that was all stuff I really wanted to get across, and also characters I want to write about, people who are not like just typical stereotypes, present like this whole spectrum of Jewishness and Judaism. it really becomes interesting when you kind of like examine how Jewish rep goes from like old school horror, like or even like it's not, horror has not been a genre that was very good to the Jews for a very long time.
Right.
I love swords and sorcery stuff, but like Robert E. Howard was very anti-Semitic, and that definitely came across in his writing sometimes.
Yeah.
Bram Stoker was anti-Semitic, and that came across like you just have a random Jewish character who's a greedy little hairy guy who gets bribed by the heroes.
Yeah.
And that is something that I think I was asking recently, like, hey, is there any Jewish swords and sorcery? It's like, well, maybe there's like 5 stories over the course of 90 years with how close that genre spread. And that kind of like makes you think. It's like, wow, that's really not great.
No, it isn't. And why do you think that is exactly? Just people don't want to touch that because regarding the Holocaust, and they're afraid of misrepresentation. I mean, there's a lot of Jewish people out there. They're a major part of the population.
Yeah.
So why don't we think we see more submissions from them?
I think it's interesting. I think it's a vicious cycle in a sense that people get into their heads that we don't want to see like, we just think Jews are only a religion. We don't really see them as a people. We have those we don't see them as a minority who needs representation in a sense, and that kind of leads into a vicious cycle when so much Jewish stuff kind of get into their heads that they're not going to be successful if they're writing their own culture, or they're not going to be successful if they're doing their stuff, and that just gets like I said, it just feeds into it like a self-effacing loop that Jewish people writing Jewish characters and culture doesn't get much play. Where I think even a lot of well-meaning people reinforce those systemic barriers without realizing it, or they look at it like there's only a certain amount they can accept, and they don't really see it as vital. Jewish people get that representation. I think that there's been improvements on that. I certainly think there's more coming out, like the Jewish Book of Horror and John Baltisberger's Madness Heart Press, with his publisher Madness Heart Press. I think there's more that's coming out than ever, but there's still a really long way to go. I think you have like major publications that very rarely, or if ever, publish Jewish stuff. So I want Jewish people to like be submitting in greater numbers. I want to say like, hey, we do need like there's one of my favorite writers, Richard Dansky. He has a great trilogy. He has some great short stories called the Red Palash stories, which are about a Jewish pirate rabbi going through horror adventures, which is total swords and sorcery stuff. And I think
Awesome.
there's really they're fantastic. People need to go and read this. Like, read it, enjoy it. Say you want more of it. Champion Jewish people who are doing it. We need so much more representation out there on the market right now. I want to see more of multiple different kinds of cultures. I think it's still a very white Gentile industry, unfortunately. And and nothing against a lot of white Gentiles. They write some of my favorite stuff. One of the biggest inspirations for Long Shalom in the cosmic horror aspect was Laird Barron, who I have nothing but good things to say about. Yeah. And I just want there to be a world where Laird Barron and a bunch of Jewish writers too can all have their stories out there successfully on the market.